to the 80/20 Baseball Podcast. Strike! The 80/20 Coaching Masterclass, our weekly get-together where coaches go from new to good and good to great. Mastering the fundamentals and the art of coaching.
Welcome, youth baseball coaching community. I'm excited to bring what I think is a really good interview that I think will definitely improve our mindsets, making us better coaches on a wide variety of skills throughout our coaching skill set. Scott Swartzbaugh, somebody I know personally. We're going to get in today to part one of the interview with Scott Swartzbaugh. Scott's day job is coaching CEOs, coaching vice presidents in the business world, but his background is deeply connected with years of coaching. He had his own 4 kids, all play sports. He had that experience there. Scott played on national championship volleyball teams at UCLA back in the 80s. He's based out of Southern California. In fact, his late father-in-law is one of the most well-known baseball scouts over the last 40-ish years in Southern California. He even drafted my roommate 25 years ago. I got connected with Scott up here in the Boise area as he's been spending extended time with family that he has up here. So really excited. He's a great fit for this podcast. If you are, and I'm going to do a shameless plug for Scott, he didn't tell me to do this. If you have your own business or you're trying to excel with the business that you work for, I'm going to put Scott's information in the show notes. So if that's something you're interested in, Scott's somebody who really gets it and just a really balanced approach, yet detailed, nuanced. It's pretty impressive. So we bounce around different topics, different strategies, different tips. And the outline of the interview is not question and answer, which is usually what we do here, but simply Scott going through his top 10 recommendations, his top 10 tips for coaches. All right, let's dive in. All right, I am here with Scott Swartzbaugh. Scott, how you doing today?
Doing awesome, Bo. Thanks for having me in.
Oh, I'm pumped up to have you here, talking with you and just kind of getting to know you over the last year has been awesome. And when we first started speaking, I thought, whoa, this is the kind of guy that we got to have on the podcast because your message and your knowledge is exactly what I think the listeners would benefit from hearing. So here you are. With that said, Scott, you maybe could tell the listeners, what you're doing right now. And also come back around to your journey as an athlete and your coaching journey.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely. So love these topics. So thanks for having me in. I'm a recovering coach, 3rd generation. So interesting that I ended up in sports coaching. And then I also do this for a living within the corporate world. I coach CEOs and VPs, helping them figure out, sales and sales leadership and what awesome conversations look like, active listening, things like what we call 70-30 rule, which means that if we're getting, in this case, we'll be talking about athletes, but as it relates to CEOs and VPs, not selling, but creating topics for them to understand and attach to that makes them better. In the business world, much of that is the opportunity within the sports world as well. So there's disciplines that are tied to that coaches and kids can evolve through. So we're helping with the performance conversations in different ways in which to not, as I call it, data dump. Sometimes as coaches, we get into a lot of information that becomes overload. We coach to the same things within the corporate world, that it's not all about what you know and how smart you are, but it's also leading people to adopt and adapt and learn on their own and then own that information, own that process and own that experience. It's a wonderful way to encapsulate that. Much of what that is transferable, right? And I'll get into some of the topics there, Bo, but I'll give you an example that just came to mind. And I ended up mentoring a gentleman that was first team All-American at UCI, then played for the national team, played pro. I was introduced to him to help him look into transitioning into the corporate world and taking the skills as an athlete and the experiences of a highly performing athlete and then transition them into the workforce. And I think if we're looking at things that are what I call coaching with a shepherd's heart, right? That there's knowledge transfer into life skills. And I think that's sometimes a missing component of what we would consider as coaches and mentors and fathers. What are we leaving behind, right? And so I got a great text from this guy the other day out of the blue. And it's like, I can't thank you enough for believing in me, giving time, helping me understand my skills in transitioning. And now he decided instead of going to the corporate world, he's decided to stay in the coaching world. And so getting a reflection of those opportunities is really helping them understand what those capabilities are and skills, and then transitioning that into a good work-life balance and being able to take advantage of those things. Those are things that you don't always get the feedback for, but it was such a wonderful text. I got married, I had a kid since we talked last. And, so it was wonderful to see that a lot of this becomes the opportunity to mentor. Right. And so a lot of the connections I'll chat about today are iron sharpens iron. And so taking the opportunity to understand people and then what your role is as an athlete and then as a coach. But I'll back up a little bit, Bo, and chat a little bit about my journey. So as I was kiddingly saying, I'm a third generation coach. My grandfather was a coach. My dad was a coach and an athlete. And then I ended up in the same realm. They were traditional baseball, basketball, football guys. The way my journey worked out was I hurt my knee going into my freshman year, surfing of all things, and couldn't play football. And I was a big kid, about 6-footer coming into high school. And so I thought that was kind of a godly plan that shifted me into other sports. And I ended up specializing as a 5-sport athlete, transitioning into high school into 2 sports, basketball and volleyball. I killed my dad because he was a baseball, basketball guy. And he was actually asked to try out for the Dodgers when the Dodgers moved to LA back in the 50s. He was an all-city pitcher and all-city guard, all-city wide receiver at Burbank High School. So it was kind of funny that I ended up just one of the 3 sports he played, but it was just how life takes you. I had the good graces of starting on varsity sports for 3 years in basketball, volleyball, and then I was athlete of the year and for the entire league that was producing a lot of CIF championships and a lot of basketball, volleyball guys in the college world, and then ended up being a top 10 recruit, ended up at UCLA. So had some very serendipitous, I stayed healthy for the most part, and those were foundational experiences for sure. I had the opportunity to beat the crosstown rival with draining a 25-footer at the buzzer. I've done walk-off home runs as a little leaguer in the championship game. So I've been very blessed with athletic success that I can't claim that was like, I'm just all that in a bag of chips, right? I think taking that and not letting it go to your head, but just going, wow, what an opportunity, what an experience. And then not expecting the same as you move into whatever you move into, whether you stay an athlete for a longer time than playing on, like for you, with baseball, for others, whatever that passion and sport and where God takes you. But I think some of the opportunities are to realize that you were blessed in those moments. And then how can I help from a coach's standpoint with these kids that are in our hands and an opportunity to mentor what they can attach to. I'm going to walk through like 10 items of what I believe the mentality and setting the tone as a coach is so critical, and really the opportunity to create the right narrative of learning means performance and being coachable, as opposed to I'm going to tell this kid 25 times what I think he should be doing instead of helping him own that information. So I think if we're truly coachable and as a coach, and then we're also coachable as a player, we've set the narrative for a very healthy environment. So one of the topics I'll mention, and if any of you might be writing things down, if you write things down, there's a 30 to 40% higher chance you will actually do them. And as humans, we have an 8-second attention span. So if we don't write it down, and we didn't remember in that 8-second period of a conversation like this situation, then there's a good chance there may not be much change. So that's the human being in us, right? We're, as they say, we're broken vessels. So how do we fight that by being the best person and the best coach and the best husband and the best mentor that we can be? So the higher end is remain coachable. We often fight the urge that we already know everything. Transitioning into that, I always like to attach to something that helps me. So John Wooden was quite a coach. I've read a lot of books on him. My father actually played 1 year of basketball under John Wooden in the 50s. And then his uncle, my great uncle, was quite an interesting referee umpire. He actually played college sports, basketball at Toledo University in Ohio, and then became a ref. So he did NCAA championships. He did Rose Bowls in Pasadena. And then he was also, believe it or not, the head ref of the 85 Super Bowl. And so he had a very interesting blend of both understanding the game and refereeing and umpiring, but also as an athlete, which is a pretty unique combination. So my Uncle Bob actually refereed the last game that Wooden ever coached in the 75 national title game in San Diego that UCLA won. And then he decided that was enough. When you win 10 national titles in 12 years, you better hang it up, right? You're not doing very well. So that's some fun trivia, right, Bo? But the combination was, if you ever look it up, it's a wildly great thing. The pyramid of success, never forget my dad handing that to me in like 8th grade basketball. And I said, what are we supposed to color this thing? Do we have crayons, Dad? And he's like, I'm just smart aleck. But it was an 8th grade basketball team. Dad understood the guts of the sport quite well. He was indoctrinated into the disciplines of wooden, right? Every detail matters. How do you put your socks on? All the little things that go into putting the athlete and the team in the greatest situation to perform at the highest levels, right? And so I was indoctrinated in that line of thinking throughout my youth phase. And it's a great way as a life skill. And I think it's a great baseline for remaining coachable because it's visionary of not just sports, but it applies to life. It's a great tool for coaches to use that from a coachability standpoint and for the parents to see too, because remember, a lot of times the kids are stuck between coaches that may not know the game as well as they think they do. The parents don't know the game as much, and the umpires may never have played the game. So we're putting them in a situation where the level of expertise may not be as high as that's assumed. And so we're sticking this kid in this spot where there's not maybe a level of what I would call maybe sports IQ around the game and the experience of such. Because if you haven't experienced it, if you haven't had a ground ball that's ripped at you at short and it almost takes you out, or a volleyball that almost takes your head off in the back row when some guy, the block wasn't upright, or some form of that sport, you may not understand the experience that you're in as, once again, as a coach or an umpire or anybody that's around the game. So these kids are learning on the fly, right? So being coachable both from a coach's level and really understanding what you can gain from being around somebody like in the writings of a John Wooden. Great way to have a reference point of somebody who had incredible, and he was very faith-based and very analytical. He was an English major and an All-American in college before he ended up at UCLA as a coach. So he's got a very philosophical, very foundational, structured means. And then one of the greatest things I learned from him is he goes, practice time is mine, game time is theirs as a player. And I think that's a fantastic line because as coaches, sometimes we lose track that it becomes more about us walking the field, walking the court and being bigger than life and distracting from play, as opposed to the phrase I just said, coach in the practice and then make tweaks during the game and not make it about the coach. And John Wooden, for the most part, did a phenomenal job. He crossed his legs, he rolled up a program and let him play. A lot of times that is not followed because the coach has such a high desire. So from a coachability standpoint, shepherd's heart, be present, be available, but let them play the game. Remember, the greatest opportunity for a coach is to observe the team that they've coached and let them enjoy the game. They're playing a game. A game is supposed to be fun. Doesn't mean you can't have a little intensity and there's going to be some chaos around any game. You have the best game plan in the world, but I call it a planned experiment. You can have a game plan, but chances are there are going to be changes. So again, fight the urge to resist learning and think about, what are you portraying in body language, tonality of your voice? Are you overly aggressive? Do you look passive? You are a leader for them to look at when they need guidance. But for the most part, you want their head in the game and understanding what job they have on the court, on the field, whatever the sport may be. And that's your opportunity to help them be engaged and own that experience, own that opportunity. So remain coachable and be the best mentor coach to them without overcoaching, with the right tonality of your voice, and let them own that job that you're coaching them to help them to be. So that's a great place to set the tone, right? And John Wooden was a master of that.
You know what? This John Wooden's pyramid of success, I'm really glad you brought that up. And you know what? I think that would be, in and of itself, would be because of your background and your experience, not just yours, your family's, which is part of your experience. It would be awesome down the road to have you come back and break down. Maybe we could do an episode on the pyramid of success. I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but I think that is something that is talked about and brought up all the time in coaching circles, yet I don't think is really broken down. It's kind of like, here it is, look at it, or it's mentioned, but I don't think it's really broken down and given the credit, or I should say kind of dug into and almost simplified and synthesized for, the everyday youth coach. But I'm really glad you brought that up. And, along that line, it's fascinating that your uncle, your great uncle, he was a ref at the Super Bowl. He reffed John Wooden's last game. And your background, I mean, you have an experience, your family's experiences, not just as coaches, but as parents. And I know we'll probably get into that a little bit. You've got a lot of experience as a parent of youth athletes, a player on so many levels, and the ref. Being coachable, I really think, Scott, the listeners of our podcast you seek out a podcast like this because you are coachable, you want to learn. So I think inherently the listeners are just amazing people. And I always say, they should be proud of themselves for being a coach. And even, they should be even prouder than that because they're trying to be better. They're trying to improve themselves. So they're seeking out this time when they could just have on something else. They're spending that 20, 30 minutes a week coming on here and trying to become better. And the emails I get from coaches just want to be better. And it's not like, hey, Coach Bo, can I score more runs? How do my players hit more home runs? Or how do I get my pitchers to strike out more players? And of course, that's part of the game. And I do get a lot of strategy emails, but it's a lot more of the, I want to make this enjoyable. I want it to be, how do I have a fast-paced, fun practice, and how to get team culture going. And lastly, you hit something that's so interesting about the practice time is my time. The John Wooden quote, practice time is my time and game time is theirs. And I might not have got that exactly right, but it was practice time is mine, game time is the players. And it's so interesting you said that because just last night, I saw what I think is one of the best coaching quotes I have ever seen. And I've been studying coaching for almost 25 years now. Speaking of coaches that sat back during practice, I first started studying and analyzing coaches with Phil Jackson 25 years ago. And I read all his books and studied everything that he did. And he was one who would sit back, but not at practice. He was moving around coaching, but during the games, that was he. So here's a quote that I heard. Tell me what you think about this. And it's college basketball, but it's not the male basketball. It's women's basketball. This is Pat Summitt, who I know you're very familiar with that name, Pat Summitt,
Tennessee
Hall of Fame. I believe Coach Summitt recently passed. I think so. She was all over ESPN growing up, even when women's sports wasn't as big as it, it didn't get as much play time. And she was all over. And here's the quote. It says, quote, most people get excited about games, but I've got to be excited about practice because that's my classroom. What do you think about that quote?
Oh, I absolutely love it. And I think the classroom is her petri dish, right? It's her chance to mold and form people. And I love that. I love that quote. And I think when you look at things from a philosophical and then be able to apply it, you stay in the right tone of, remember, it's about the kids. You're volunteering time, right? This is your give back. My cousin's a very successful coach, volleyball coach, and has been coach of the year and all kinds of stuff. We won titles for them a couple of years ago. We won a CIF title and a state title in California, and we've got 3 kids playing D1. But in community, that he brings the kids together, and that's how we coach them. And so they understood that they were responsible for their own ability and job that they would do, and then the greater cause of working truly as a team, never as an individual, and breaking their arm, patting themselves in the back. And that synergy and that chemistry that gets created by knowing there's a greater cause within the team, that you personally are responsible for the job you do. The connection, like the quote you just mentioned, was really the inflection of why people coach. You want to help them for their own benefit, be the best version of who they can be, right? And there's going to be risk and reward. I always like to mention that, you and I talked, Bo, and father-in-law was a scout from Houston Astros for 27 years. And he goes, hey, the best hitters fail 70% of the time. That's a lot of failure. And that's a 300 hitter. The other guys are failing 7 to 8 times, right? So it's a part of sports, but it's also a part of life. So applying those. The next phrase I'm going to adapt into the conversation is get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. Get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. That's a way to, in humility, to realize I'm not the best coach that I can be. The kid's not quite there, and in monitoring all this. So I'll give you a quick story, and one personal, but mainly around my father-in-law's dad, who was a minor league pitcher in the Detroit Tiger system, and then decided to be the manager of Cal State LA, in East LA, division. It was Division I at the time. I think it still is. He had the Phantom infield. Now, the Phantom infield became so popular in 1977 that people would come watch. They couldn't wait to get there for warm-ups and didn't really care about the game. So the uncomfortableness of doing your whole infield, outfield warm-up routine, right? It's cutoff man. You're emulating play, right? You're practicing without a ball. So they were measuring the timing of how a ball would typically travel, release, okay, play at home. Guys coming in for a slide, whatever the situation would be. And I remember that when they went to regionals in Hawaii, I heard this story that the place filled up just to watch Cal State LA warm up. Cal State LA had such a phenomenal run. And I think it was the play acting of getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, because they're doing infield without a ball, right? So it was the Phantom infield. So that team knocked off SC, got all the way to the College World Series, took, I think, fourth. And Jack Deutsch was the National Division I Coach of the Year. He got into the psyche of people in the collective of how to get uncomfortable with a lot of things, but especially running infield without a ball and running the outfield as well, right? This was warm up. I think one of the things that we lose sight of too, and there's a phrase I want to give you guys is, there's progress, not perfection. We're all progressing as a coach. We're all trying to be realistic as a fan and the parents sitting in the stands. And as that kid, we didn't come out of the womb with, hey, that kid's a great shortstop. Sometimes you look at an athlete and go, okay, that person was meant to be a pitcher, a left fielder, a hitter, whatever, or, whatever form of play and athlete that you are. But the idea that failure owns you is not enjoying the sport. So take risks. You want to learn from a coaching standpoint to help that kid really learn what that risk looks like and let them get comfortable with the uncomfortable so that they take risks so they can feel the physical. So a lot of times what will coach will not be emulated in what you see physically, right? The connection between what they're doing is the hardest part about coaching to help them develop and really progress and ultimately perform at the greatest levels that they are, right? So it could be their arm angle. If they're baseball, same arm angle applies to volleyball. Same arm angle as a quarterback when you're throwing a football. There's a lot of things that are progressively the same. And then it becomes, what is my goal? What is my plan? Like, what am I trying to achieve? What is my role? And I'll dive into one thing about getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. So when I coach kids, and I don't know if this was a Phil Jackson thing, and I read the book too, Bo, Sacred Hoops, wonderful book. It talked about really everybody within the Chicago system and then on to LA for Phil Jackson was everybody is of equal importance. One of the biggest things I took out of that book and what I think I've stumbled in just in my own progression was everybody has to feel equally important. They may not play the most important roles, but they all have to feel that they're an integral part of the team. So the worst kid that you stick in left field is that kid has to feel, because that emulates and it rises them up, that do your best, run to your position, back up your throws if they're in the outfield. Know each situation as best you can to perform at the highest levels for you as an individual, but ultimately for the team, right? And I know that, and I'll transition a little bit from Jack Deutsch to Doug Deutsch, his son, which is my father-in-law. The reason he was so endeared and why, Bo, you probably remember him is he made it about you, not him. He made it about you, not him. And a lot of times as coaches, we don't realize that the narrative flips and we're making it more about us as coaches. And if you're driven, you're determined personality, that's a natural trap that you can fall into, that it becomes more about what you want and what you believe in your competitive side than it is about what you're doing to collectively bring that team together to have the greatest opportunity to enjoy the journey. And remember, it's all about progress, not perfection. There's no perfect player. There's no perfect coach. There's some phenomenal coaches. There's some phenomenal players, but there's a mindset around that, right? So getting comfortable with the uncomfortable is getting into the right mindset of what is my mission? What's my vision? What's my value to the team? We coach a lot to that in the corporate world. Mission, vision, and value. It's a great way to coach. What is our mission? We want to win a certain amount of games, or we want to score a certain amount of runs. We want to be the best defensive team in the league. Whatever that mission, that vision, and that value that you want to bring as a team, it's a great way to set goals and initiatives as a team and as players. When I would bring players in always after a game, the next practice after a game, I said, all right, you know the routine. I want to hear 3 things you did well and 1 thing that you want to work on. Not what you did wrong, not that you played poorly, not that you cost us a game. And what it does is it helps the athlete in a group setting of a very positive environment. I love that I was able to hit the cutoff man. I know that helped us get the guy out at home. I thought I ran the bases well. I think I need to stay down on the ball better and keep my head down. I tend to glance up and, ball's going to go through my legs. And so those initiatives, because they say them verbally and in front of their teammates, there's a collective spirit that there's an accountability both to themselves and to the team that I'm affirming what I did well, and here's the things I want to work on. Not that you did wrong or right. Because when we get into the wrong or right, we tend to get into the land of a little bit of negativity. One other quick story around get comfortable, feeling uncomfortable is I coached some 3rd and 4th graders once upon a time, and they were a pretty funny crew. Most of them couldn't chew gum or walk yet, and to be expected, they were young little athletes. And I figured out that because my skills were so low, and I had one kid, believe it or not, that could make threes, and he was a 4th grader, literally bury a college 3. And that's a whole nother story about an athlete doing too much. and would literally come off the bench crying. I'm like, wait a minute, you just buried a three. What's going on here? I don't know. Well, his dad had him in four sports and he was exhausted, right? So measuring and tempering, how much time we spent. But the uncomfortable for these kids was they didn't really understand the sport. And the quick story was that because I knew that, I figured out I got to make probably one of the best things that will help us control the boards and rebounding was make rebounding fun. And I came up with all these screwy games in practice to teach them how to get a butt on a guy and box him out. And I had this whole scoring system, and they thought it was the funnest thing in the world to box a guy out and rebound. So anyways, we get to the playoffs and we're the 8 seed. We crawl into the playoffs and we play the 1 seed, and we boxed them out so hard and clean that we beat the 1 seed. We made an activity into a fun environment. So what I'm getting at is that if you make practice fun, but constructive and design, then they're going to enjoy it rather than loathe it. And one thing too, well, I'll get to it in a sec. So Bo, anything there you wanted to lean into?
I think the gamifying these tedious, what we might think of as tedious tasks of rebounding, some of the basics, the real basics, the real fundamentals, gamifying them, especially with younger kids. And, that also creates an inherent kind of competitive fun factor. What you said about every kid on the team needing to feel like an integral part of the team, it got me thinking, Scott, that by having this mindset as a coach, by having the mindset that my job or one of my goals as a coach is to get every player to feel like they are an integral part of the team. By having that vision and that goal, I think it will force us as coaches to find ways to get that player to help, of course. And what I think it will unpack or uncover some of those hidden strengths that maybe we didn't pay attention to or look for by forcing ourselves to find ways to get a kid to believe, or maybe on their own, find a belief in that they are an integral part. But also as a coach, how can we show them? How can we tell them how they are that integral part to the team? I think it's going to force coaches to think outside of the box and look at different ways to highlight to those kids, especially the kids that just, don't stand out. They don't hit the ball hard. They're not the best hitter. They're not the best pitcher. They're not the best spiker. They're not the best, they don't have the best, like in volleyball, the best jump serve, and they're not the best shortstop. Those kids that don't have any skills physically that really shine and really are like, oh, he's an all-star at that. So it forces, I think, coaches to find some hidden talents that can then be leveraged into more team success. So as a side note to that, I think there's something even more to that there's it's almost like a win-win-win. Sure. And I didn't hit on that. Your late father-in-law, Doug Deutsch, was, believe it or not, such a small world, one of the most well-known scouts in the Southern California area, which is obviously a hotbed. I mean, you're going to put good scouts in Southern California because there's just the density of players. And he was probably the hardest working scout that I came across. Maybe him and Craig Wiseman, who was with the Tampa Bay Rays at the time. It's a small world. You mentioned your father-in-law's dad. He said, oh, he coached at Cal State LA, Coach Deutsch. And I'm like, Deutsch, any relation to Doug Deutsch? Yes, that's my father-in-law. I'm like, no way. He sat in my living room multiple times. He actually drafted my roommate from Long Beach State. He drafted him with the 5th round pick. It was with the Astros at the time. I saw the whole process, and he was very, what he wrote down a lot. You speaking of writing down things and writing and keeping notes, he was very meticulous. His notepad, he would set all these notes because you're right, he didn't want to forget things. And he was a forward thinker. I remember asking questions. He was doing things well before these analytical guys came in. He was doing things, tests and stuff that were like, wait, what? What is that? I'm like, Russ, what is he testing you on? And it was like years ahead of everybody. Yeah, small world that somebody that probably saw me play 100 times at Long Beach State. So I think that was great. Yeah, so I definitely wanted to hit on the fact that we are very closely connected. Definitely knew your father-in-law very well, and it was awesome to hear that. Such a small world. So with that said, I'll let you kind of get into the next part.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. You just mentioned it, but write and rewrite your personal goals. I mentioned earlier, when you don't write something down, you don't set goals. They're not written. They're not shared, written or shared. 40% less chance that you will perform, whether you're the coach or the kids. Right? You're setting goals of, what is your goal? Well, I really want to improve my arm strength to make plays from right field to throw home. Okay, great. I want to stay back on my back foot, so I make sure I don't chase balls out of the strike zone. I want to keep my weight back and then transition, whatever the details are. So granular goals meets bigger goals. And then you're you're aligning to them, and then you're creating affirmations around them. And they're repeated in a positive way. So my dad was a big write things down. You got to write things down. My dad required that I got to every field or court at least an hour before game time. So when you're 10 years old, you're like, there's no one here yet. Yeah, but we're here. We're ready. Like there was a mental preparation to kind of cleanse your mind and be ready for the activity at hand. Of course, when you're a kid, this is playtime. You're going to go play a game. We have to always remember and connect back to, we're playing a game. It doesn't mean you're screwing around on the field or picking flowers in left field, but you need to set the mindset that let's enjoy the journey. Let's enjoy the experience of competition. And sometimes we lose sight of that. Writing those goals initially, one of the big things that I love to emphasize is that setting that narrative around that level of goals and initiatives becomes the enjoyment factor of that experience is key, right? So connecting to that and reaffirming that with your teammates becomes that higher ground. So once again, my dad was really big as an athlete and a coach that you write things down, you have goals and initiatives, and that was a great experience for me. So help them remember what their goals are. They should know their goals. Every athlete should own their job, whatever they're playing. I know in Little League especially, or any form of youth sports, especially baseball, hey, you're first base, what's your goal? And they should own that experience. They should own what they're doing and help them to mature to it. Because if you're constantly reminding them, that means it's the wrong direction. Hey, what's your goal today? I'm going to play mean first base. And I'm going to dig every ball out. If it's a poorly thrown ball, I'm up on my balls on my feet. I'm leaning in. I know the situations and I'm prepared. Right. So that may be that daily goal. It could be weekly. It could be the season. So what do you do well? What do you want to work on? Is back to that connection. So writing them down, affirming them as a coach, and we don't badger each other, but that's your mentoring opportunity. How's it going? Did you perform the way you wanted to? What did you do well? What do you want to work on? So those are affirmations. So once again, 40% less chance that these will happen as a coach or a player, or even the parents understanding that there's goals set, and that's between the coach and the players. And the parents need to be happy observers, clap, encourage, and affirm these opportunities. Write the goals, affirm the goals, remind each other of the goals, and then have fun with the sport. So that's a big aspect.
The granular goals, I like how you said that. I remember years ago coaching a team we were lined up to be really good. And the coach said, hey, let's have everybody write their goals down. The coach at the time, he won Southern California Coach of the Year that year. I said, Coach, after the kids write all their goals down, I'd like to see the list because, I think as assistant coaches, we should all know. And about half of the goals were not granular and they weren't specific and they definitely weren't actionable in terms of like something they could do at practice. It was like win league. It was like bat 300. And I said, Coach, we gotta have them rewrite all these goals, all these goals. So they are something that they can work on it. It should be something specific they can do it at every practice. Does that make sense?
Actionable. You nailed it. Yeah. And then once again, they have to own it. If you watch the coaching world, if the coach is constantly repeating the same thing, they're never going to own it because they're rejecting it. They're hearing it as a negative reinforcement rather than positive enforcement. So I'm a huge believer in rhetorical coaching. How to go out there. You tell me. But if you watch sometimes football, basketball, but any sport, the coach is like ready to tear the helmet off the kid or whatever, right? They're emotionally, there's a great point I want to make there on that point real quick. As a coach, as a father, as a mentor, in most cases, if not all, you need to emotionally detach from your emotions that you're projecting to the players, to the umpires. And a lot of times, and in the corporate world, same thing, because a lot of times there's disappointment. The failure rates are about as high as I mentioned as a 300 hitter as there is in corporate world. Nobody walks in and gets 100% of their sales. Nobody achieves 100% decision in a courtroom if you're a lawyer. So putting the right narrative of tone that you expect the best, but let's be realists about the experience, not get too high and too low, right? Your job is to be positive in the right environment, a shepherd's heart in the coaching opportunities, never to shame or defame, but to uplift in the learning opportunity rather than becoming a negative. So those are big moments that sometimes we miss because we're too attached to the outcome. We're too attached to, gosh, we could have scored 3 more runs. Man, we could have won that game. So I'll leave it at that. But one more note that I'll touch on is, I'll touch on it later. So let's move on to the next, if that's okay. If you have any commentary, please share.
No, I think what you said was great. I would just add in I've heard multiple baseball players, the real confident ones. I don't know if it was Reggie Jackson, but it was like, hey, I'm not disappointed with that strikeout because that just means I'm one at bat closer to my next home run.
Love it. Yeah, it's the persona that, hey, I can't wait for the next opportunity, right? As opposed to loathing that, oh, here it comes, right? And I'm a huge believer that realistic but positive mindset in all directions, tonality over voice. If you think about it, that Reggie was ready for, I can't wait for the next opportunity to be successful. I'm not going to think about that I struck out or grounded out or flew out, whatever, right? I wanted to move on to the next number 4 and keep us moving. So number 4 would be borrow from others that appear stronger. Borrow from others that appear stronger. I happen to play, I was a basketball, volleyball prospect for college coming out of high school and ended up being a top 10 recruit, Pepperdine, SC, UCLA, all from the scholarships were 1, 2, 3 in the country. So I was very blessed. You don't know what's happening. I actually followed this guy named Coach Cry, if you've ever heard that name, winning his coach. National team, won 150,000. Anyways, so I was around a very interesting group of folks. Al Skates won 20 national titles in 50 years as a coach, winningest coach in NCAA history, I believe. And then a guy that took over from him is a guy, John Swartzbaugh, who also won national titles as a player and then UCI and UCLA as a coach. And I coached with John Swartzbaugh through a club system in Newport Beach, Balboa Bay Volleyball Club, and got a chance to get to know him pretty well. We both came out of the same system at UCLA and very philosophical, faith-based approach. And it's interesting to observe him when he was running the national teams and Al would be running the teams. And Al had a different approach than John, but they had a very calm, confident approach about their coaching styles. And that confidence illuminated in strength. And it also helped with the chemistry on the court that this coach knew what was going on and then empowered the players to go do their jobs. And one of the things that was a saying that they developed at UCLA was, and this is kind of a little bit vague, but it only counts in May. And I'm like walking around as a freshman, like, what counts in May? What are you talking about? And they go, the Final Four is the first weekend of May. It only counts in May. We can do all this work off season and during the preseason and then the main part of the season, but the Final Four was always the first weekend. So their goal was it only counts in May, meaning that's our goal to make sure that we are a part of that weekend. It worked out pretty well, but it gave an idea that to borrow from others that appear stronger where they had a strength of knowing what that end game looked like. And then you backed it into the hard work that you put into it to get there. I'll give you an example. When we walked in the gym back in that time, we would do 500 push-ups, 500 sit-ups. We ran, dive and give me 50 sit-ups. And then we would jump 500 times in the gym every day. So the level of conditioning, mental strength, routine, obviously they would mix up the drills, sometimes for scrimmaging, all that good stuff. Any sport will have that, but it was the strength and the physical conditioning and the dynamics and the system that they created to create strength, both physically and mentally. And then emotionally, you were at a higher level of performance. You borrow from others that appear stronger where the systems and discipline, and everybody has a different belief system, but taking from people, John and Al both won, I don't know, between the two of them, 30 national titles. It's incredible. But there was a calmness of strength, of belief that you bring to the table that lets those players own that it is about them and their opportunity to perform. But the leadership that you provide and the strength of that is the opportunity to extend success, right? One of the lines I'd like to say, try on their confidence for size until it is really who you are as a person and as a coach, right? So there's a strength in knowledge, there's strength in observations. And if you're in a mindset of watching a Phil Jackson, watching a John Wooden, watching Belichick, pick a famous coach that created repeatable strength of leadership, system, belief, and the type of people they wanted in the system. So it's your opportunity to coach these kids into how you want them to learn, like you want them to be coachable. So active listening, the positivity of your voice is everything and how they accept things. I'll tell you, observe my dad and other coaches. And so I had a coaching opportunity about 10 years ago, and I was assistant coaching my daughter's 16th team and my son's 14th team. And I ended up coaching and they were both girls and boys were at the same huge gym that used to have in Anaheim. And boys need a little bit more stern positivity to the tonality and getting them to head nod and smaller amounts of information. And girls need a different tonality that's drawn into their to their psyche in a different way that draws them into their own belief system. Very, very analytical in how they are. So I was going between a top 14 team. That 14th team ended up being number one in the entire nation that year. And the 16th team struggled because even though they had a belief of what they were doing, they didn't have a leader within the team. So it was just one of those things. But the tonality and the messaging were different, and not better or worse, just different. So if you're coaching girls, you're going to tie into more of the psychological messaging to get them to draw into their own conclusions. Boys need a combination of those things. But it was, if you appear strong and confident in the things that you communicate in strong sound bites of actionable items. Bo, you mentioned that a minute ago. What's actionable? They can go experiment on the court and go, okay, I get it. My feet were wrong. I was in the wrong spot. I was not anticipating what was happening. So you're giving them words of activity and actionable topics in order for them to own how they get better. And so that becomes strength in knowledge and strength in experience, and then they can perform at a much higher level.
All right, that concludes part 1 of the interview with Scott Swartzbaugh. We'll listen to part 2 next week, and all 3 parts of this interview to me are equally good with regard to the content, the tips, the actionable advice, recommendations that Scott provides. So I'll see you back next week, coming out every Tuesday with a new episode. Until then, let's keep taking care of our health, our foundations, or at least the 80-20 of our health, so we can be at our best for our family, close friends, our players, our teams. All right, y'all take care. Until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. We got this. Now, let's take the field.